Okay, whatever you thought you knew about the Middle East, you might want to just toss it out the window because things are moving fast. Right now, two of the world's biggest adversaries, the US and Iran, are actually at the negotiating table. So today, we are going to break down this wild new chessboard and figure out what the heck is really going on. So let's just dive right into the central puzzle here. I mean, for years, the narrative has been that a US-Iran conflict was pretty much inevitable. So what changed? Why all of a sudden are they talking about peace? It doesn't quite add up, right? Well, to really get to the bottom of this, you have to understand a massive, fundamental shift in how America sees its own role in the world. It really all comes down to one thing: money. The analysis we're looking at today argues that the US is simply no longer willing, or maybe even able, to pay the price to maintain the global order it created. And this slide right here really just nails the argument. The US has switched roles. It's gone from being the order maintainer to the order tax collector. Think about it. The maintainer pays in blood and treasure, sends aircraft carriers to protect allies, and foots the bill for security. But the tax collector, their logic is totally different. The number one priority is just to protect the financial system so you can keep printing money to pay the bills. And that means you avoid costly new wars at all costs. And this quote is just brutal, but it gets to the heart of the new priority. See, with a Ponzi scheme, the biggest fear isn't that the underlying business is weak. It's that people lose confidence. So the new calculation in Washington is that it is far, far better to let the entire Middle East collapse into chaos than it is to let Wall Street have a bad week. The financial system must be protected, no matter what. Okay, so with that new reality in mind, that America's top priority is avoiding costly messes, the logic of a deal with Iran suddenly becomes crystal clear. Let's break down how this unlikely deal actually works. And here is the key. You know, it's pretty wild. Both sides, for their own very different reasons, desperately want the exact same thing right now: for the US to get out of the fight. The US gets to walk away without paying the astronomical price of another war in the Middle East. And Iran? Well, Iran gets the deal of a lifetime. They get to keep their single most powerful bargaining chip, their control over the Strait of Hormuz, and they get sanctions relief on top of it. It's a win-win. So what this means is that any deal we see isn't going to be about the nitty-gritty details. Forget some ironclad 15-point plan where Iran gives up everything. No way. The real goal here is to create what you could call a paper peace, a document that looks good, sounds good, generates some positive headlines, and gives the US the political cover it needs to just pack up and leave. And that really is the bottom line. This whole exercise isn't about actually solving the deep-seated conflict between these two countries. It's about ending America's direct role in it. It's a face-saving way for the White House to declare mission accomplished and bring the troops home, so to speak, while Iran quietly holds on to the strategic leverage it always wanted. Okay, but if the US and Iran have this quiet little understanding going on, where does that leave America's number one ally in the region, Israel? Well, this is where things get really complicated, because Israel is now caught in a truly impossible position. You can see the bind right here. Domestically, for political survival, the Israeli government feels it needs to continue the war and deliver something that looks like a decisive victory. But its most important ally, the United States, has the exact opposite goal: get out of the war and stop paying for it. I mean, those two positions are on a collision course. They simply cannot both be true at the same time. So what on earth does Israel do? Well, according to this analysis, it performs what you could call an exquisite trick. First, you propose a peace deal, but you bake an impossible condition into it, like demanding that the Lebanese government, which is incredibly weak, somehow disarm Hezbollah. That's never going to happen. It's like asking a poodle to tame a lion. So when that condition inevitably fails, Israel gets to turn to the world and say, hey, we tried for peace, but they refused, so now our hands are tied and we have to continue fighting. It provides perfect legal and political cover. And you have to understand, this entire performance, this whole elaborate diplomatic stage play, it's really designed for an audience of one. The career professionals at the State Department, the folks in the intelligence agencies, they see right through this. They know what's going on. But the performance is crafted to be just plausible enough for the President of the United States to sign off on it and believe it's a genuine effort. So all of this complex maneuvering, this dance of diplomacy and deception, it's about to create a really powerful but also very temporary illusion for global markets. Here's what that's going to look like. So at first, the headlines are going to look amazing. Peace in our time, The markets are going to love it. Stocks, crypto, all the risk assets will probably rally hard, and oil prices will tumble as everyone breathes this huge sigh of relief, thinking the crisis is finally over. But then, the hangover sets in. A few weeks, maybe a month later, the market's going to wake up and realize, wait a minute, nothing has actually changed. The fighting is still going on. Iran still effectively controls the world's most important oil choke point. The deal was never really meant to be enforced, and the core risks were never taken off the table. And this is the truly scary part. The risk hasn't gone away. In fact, you could argue it's been baked into the system permanently. Iran's leverage over the Strait of Hormuz is still there. And, critically, new, sophisticated anti-aircraft missiles, likely from China, make the idea of a quick, clean airstrike to solve the problem basically impossible now. So the problem isn't gone, it's just become a ticking time bomb at the heart of the global energy system. So let's zoom out for a second and look at the really sobering long-term price of this new arrangement. Because all these short-term games are fascinating, but the final bill for all of this, well, it is coming due. And on a long enough timeline, the source argues there's a pretty brutal historical pattern. Empires in retreat always shed their most dependent allies first. For decades, Israel was a core strategic asset for the US in the Middle East. But in this new world, where America's main goal is to avoid conflict, an ally that constantly needs defending starts to look more like a strategic liability. And the ultimate fear is that it could be the one left behind when the empire finally goes home. Now, as dire as all of this is, the source warns us not to get too fixated on just the Middle East. This isn't the main event. What's happening there is critically important for sure, but think of it as the fuse, not the dynamite. Because the real systemic risk, the thing that could actually trigger a true global financial crisis 2.0, is waiting in a totally different part of the world. The analysis points its finger directly at the massive government debt markets of the G7 nations, with one country in particular sitting right at the epicenter, Japan. And this lays out the chain reaction perfectly. So first, the unresolved conflict in the Middle East keeps oil and energy prices high, which fuels inflation everywhere. That traps central banks, right? They can't raise rates too much without bankrupting their own governments. Japan, with its absolutely monumental mountain of debt, is the weakest link. It's the first domino to fall. A crisis there then triggers a massive unwind of something called the yen carry trade. That's where investors for decades have borrowed cheap money in Japan to invest all over the world. When they all rush to pay back those loans at once, it acts like a giant vacuum cleaner, sucking money out of the entire global system. And that's what starts the real crisis. And all of this leaves us with one last, pretty chilling thought. We've looked at the strategies, the deceptions, and all the players on this new global chessboard. But the final, staggering cost of an empire quietly walking away from the world it built, well, that's a bill that hasn't been calculated yet. And it might be one that we all end up having to pay.